The NFC North is like a powder keg ready to explode at any second. 4 teams, 1 spot at the top, but only one will rise from the rubble. Love was in the air for the 2nd straight season, and Jordan Love showed Green Bay Packers fans that it wasn't just a middle school infatuation, but the real deal. Despite missing 2 games, he finished with 3,389 yards, 25 touchdowns, and the Green Bay Packers improved by 1 game in 2024. They were a big play offense, finishing 12th in explosive plays and 8th in overall EPA. A sign that this offense was looking to move the ball in chunks and score a lot of points. They were top 5 in points scored in 2024. Josh Jacobs was brought in to bolster that run game. He finished with 1,300 yards and 15 touchdowns.
He's good.
Behind an awful offensive line. But for all the fireworks, the big gestures, the big plays, they just weren't consistent in big games. When it mattered most, the lights were brightest, they shrunk. Jordan Love threw 3 interceptions in the wild card round against the Eagles. They didn't deliver against the Vikings or the Lions. And that was really the story of the Green Bay Packers. They finished just 14th in offensive success. Not only that, but drops really hindered this offense. Jaden Reed had a 12% drop rate. Injuries to Reed himself, Dobbs, and Love all derailed different parts of their season. But there is hope, Green Bay fans, because for the first time in 23 years, you guys drafted Matthew Golden, a wide receiver, in the 1st round.
Wow.
He had a 17 yards per reception average last year in college. You guys also added Anthony Belton to your tackle position and re-signed Aaron Banks, hoping that maybe the offensive line will improve next season. And defensively, the Packers were actually pretty good. They were one of the best tackling teams in 2024. They were top 10 in that category. And they used creativity to get pressure. I mean, they blitzed at an alarming rate. But what does that do to your defensive backfield? It leaves them on an island because your defensive line just cannot deliver pressure. Rashawn Gary wasn't as explosive as he was in 2023, and that left a lot of your defensive backs to play up front to try and get pressure. And Xavier McKinney, who started out strong last year, regressed at the tail end of the season. And while turnovers came in bunches, it just wasn't sustainable. Another problem facing the Green Bay Packers in 2025 is a lack of cornerback depth. And that was made more apparent with the release of Jair Alexander, who signed with the Ravens. I guess they're banking on Lucas Van Ness, Carl Brooks, and linebacker Edgerrin Cooper to step up and take the mantle of the defense.
Do you feel in charge?
If Jordan Love stays healthy, takes the next step, the offensive line is improved, the running game's improved, the defense does what it's supposed to by creating pressure up front, and the cornerbacks don't miss a beat, you could win the division with 12, 13, 11 wins. But if everything goes wrong, you're going to be stuck spinning the wheels again, going 8-9, 9-8, 10-7, just like last season and the year before. The Chicago Bears.
The Bears. The Bears.
What started as hope ended in misery for you guys, just like the Emperor's new clothes. The Emperor asked for a fancy new robe. The Chicago Bears get a fancy new quarterback and some offensive weapons. And then, what happens? You guys both go out there and embarrass yourselves. And you guys have been searching for an identity since the mid-2000s. The hype was real. You guys drafted Caleb Williams, but he became one of the most sacked quarterbacks as a rookie in NFL history. I mean, he had 68 sacks. And some of that does come from him holding on to the ball last year, but we don't want what happened to Derek Carr to happen to Caleb Williams. DJ Moore didn't perform. He only had 966 yards last season. You guys were pretty bad on offense. 26th in EPA and 30th in success rate. They averaged just 18.2 points per game, and nothing really clicked for you guys. Despite all the struggles, the Bears ranked 8th in total red zone scoring. But your drives would stall out so fast that people couldn't take a sip of their $12 beer before it was time for the defense to go back out onto the field. So what did they do in the offseason? Yeah, they hit reset so fast, like it was a Nintendo and you were blowing on the cartridge saying, please help me, please help me, please work. And now it's time to hire a new coach. Ben Johnson comes in from the Detroit Lions, trying to fix what was going on with Caleb Williams and that offense. How are they gonna do? Nobody knows.
What's he talking about? Me? No.
They also signed Drew Dalman to anchor the offensive line and gave Williams a new weapon, with Colston Loveland being drafted out of Michigan in the first round. It's a start, but we got to see some hope and prosperity from the Chicago Bears offense. We got to see Caleb Williams make the jump. We got to see that offensive line open up holes for DeAndre Swift. Defensively, though, you guys were slightly better. Montez Sweat was your leading sack master, 5.5 sacks, and the unit ranked 13th in EPA. That's better than your offense, but there were still struggles. Their pass defense held up pretty well, but the Bears' run defense was a disaster, ranking 28th in the league in yards allowed. Poor tackling doomed your team. They were letting up a lot of points and not scoring enough to compete, especially on the interior, where guys like Dexter Gervin just couldn't stop anybody, and they were running through them for big plays. There were flashes of excellence, brilliance, and production. You ranked second in red zone efficiency, but your inconsistent play led to you guys having a 5-12 record. So what do you do now if you're Chicago? You signed Dennis Allen to fix an underachieving and young defensive unit. You guys signed Grady Jarrett and Deo Adeyingbo, I hope I said his name right, to beef up that interior defensive line. And drafting Shamar Turner is going to add some depth to that rotation. On paper, this team looks really good. They say that they won the offseason again. And if the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams develop and they do better and the defense shores themselves up, I could see them winning 8 or 9 games this year. I don't see them competing for the division just yet, but all signs are looking pretty good for them. But if they falter, the defensive line is not as good as they can be. If Caleb Williams takes a step back, then they're right back where they were. 5-6, 4 games won in 2025. But no one expected what happened with the Minnesota Vikings, and competing with the Detroit Lions in 2024. What kind of bizarro world are we in? Sam Darnold, who was considered a bust, resurrected his career, having 35 touchdowns. And although he had some elite weapons like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson, he looked really good last season. He scored a contract with the Seattle Seahawks after they let him go, but we'll get more into that in a bit. The Vikings averaged 25.4 points per game. They looked pretty legit, but that's just the surface level thing. When you look at their EPA and their success rate, they were kind of middle of the pack. They didn't really do themselves any favors, and you saw them kind of peter out towards the end of the season when they faced the Detroit Lions and the Los Angeles Rams.
You come to our house, you get my wife's name right!
So in all, they were just a slightly above average offense. The offensive line was a huge problem going into the later stages of 2024. They were banged up, inconsistent, and they allowed Darnold to be pressured 39% of the time. And Aaron Jones did not look like he did when he played for the Green Bay Packers. He looks like a shell of himself, and that's why they went out and got Jordan Mason to pick up the slack for him. They didn't take any chances on offense. They usually punted the ball in like 4th and 1, and when they did attempt, they just weren't that good. To fix that, though, they went out into the offseason and made some investments in the trenches. They traded for guard Will Freeze, center Ryan Kelly, and drafted Donovan Jackson, a long, athletic interior lineman who could start right away. They're hoping that these three guys can go out and protect J.J. McCarthy, who is now the starter. All eyes are going to be on him, and Sam Darnold was shipped out. Defensively, the Vikings were one of the NFL's best, and I don't really got a problem with them. I don't have a lot of bad things to say. They did blitz at a 40% clip, and like I said with the Green Bay Packers, you're leaving your cornerbacks and your safeties on an island. They allowed only 19.5 points per game and were number 1 in rushing EPA on the defensive side and 3rd in defensive success rate. They were 4th in sacks, and it's because they had that 40% blitz rate because they just couldn't generate pressure when they rushed 4. That interior line was a weak point in their defense, generating 4 sacks on the interior, and that allows a quarterback to just step up and have a clean pocket. That's why Minnesota went out and got Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen to shore up that interior. They lost Jonathan Greenbard, but they did re-sign Andrew Van Ginkel, and that should hopefully give them a pass rush that is worth talking about in 2024.
This had better be good.
So where does that leave Minnesota in 2025? I mean, if JJ plays really well, and it's definitely his second year, but obviously he hasn't taken any snaps in any meaningful game, and if the defense plays well enough, I think this team could also contend for a playoff spot. This team's going to go like 12-5, 13-4, somewhere around that area. But if Minnesota just doesn't get the job done, J.J. McCarthy struggles and the defense also struggles, well, they're going to be finishing with 7 to 9 wins. And finally, the team with the most to prove and the most to lose, the Detroit Lions. Last year, the injury bug bit them, and it bit them hard. They were on a Super Bowl run, 14-3 record, but ultimately fell to the Washington Commanders of all teams.
What? What?
And I know I've said a lot of negative things with my brothers about Jared Goff, but 4,700 yards and 37 touchdowns is very elite. Factor in, you got a top 3 receiver in fantasy football with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Check out the video if you haven't seen it already. And an elite run game. They were number 1 in offensive success rate with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery leading the way on the rushing side of things. But then the wheels came off, and Frank Ragnow retired in the 2025 offseason after 7 seasons. And it's unsurprising because, he's been dealing with foot injuries for a while. So now you got to rely on veterans like Graham Glasgow and rookie Taylor Ratledge to fill in those big shoes. Can they do it? We don't know. And then there's the coaching side of things. Ben Johnson goes to the Chicago Bears, and what does that mean for the offense of the Detroit Lions? Nobody knows. We'll see in 2025.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
And even though that defense was top 10 in EPA, they look like an old, fatigued Lion waiting for an outsider to take them out and take over the pride. And the fallout? Well, defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn goes to coach the Jets, but it wasn't all that bad. Your safety tandem was filthy. Kirby Joseph had 9 interceptions and earned All-Pro honors. And Brian Branch, well, he had 4 more. That's 13 interceptions between 2 people. But you were flagged a lot, Detroit. And that's why the Lions went out there and got DJ Reed from the Jets to hopefully shore up one of those cornerback positions. Up front, Derek Barnes re-signed. And the Lions are hoping Tyleik Williams, their 2025 draft piece, will fill the hole in the interior. He's a real gap stuffer, especially in college. And what does that mean with Aaron Glenn gone now? Well, Dan Campbell brings the toughness to Detroit, and I'm sure they'll be fine on the toughness. We'll see what the scheme looks like with their new defensive coordinator, but I like where they are going into 2025. And barring injuries, I could see this team repeating as division champions, going 13-4, 14-3 again, 12-5. But if the wheels come off and everything just falls apart, the coordinators don't stick, injuries happen again, I see this team dropping to 3rd place. 9 wins, 8 wins, 10 wins. They're just not going to be able to have a season where they get injured again and hope to succeed. So to recap, I have the Lions, Packers, and Vikings going for the number 1 spot in the division. The Packers look good if they can get consistency on offense and the defense doesn't struggle. And the Vikings, we'll see what J.J. McCarthy can do. And the Lions and injury problems, we'll see what happens. And the Bears making moves, not there yet, but they're getting there. But what do you think? Who wins the division? And if you like football stuff, like, subscribe. I do fantasy football, NFL analysis, and also all-time teams. So I do it without the talking heads. I just give it to you straight. See you in the next video.